Good morning. Hope you're all very welcome. It's grand and sunny here in Navan. I'm going to try and delay it for trying to let more participants join us. And I feel like I'm an idiot because I'm talking to myself here and I can't have a conversation with people. So I think it would be a lot easier if there was somebody that you could kind of have a conversation with. But look, you're all very welcome to their launch. I hope you're all set for Christmas. And I wouldn't say if you're like myself, you're not. And if you're not sure, it'll still come and go. And as long as you have a healthy and happy one, that's all that counts. So on behalf of the panel, and before we get into the launch, I would like to wish you all, on behalf of National Traveller MABS and the Citizens Information Board, a very happy Christmas, a very peaceful Christmas, and a most joyful New Year. And I hope to Our Lady of Lourdes that 2021 is a lot better for than 2020 was.
Wouldn't be hard.
No, it would not. So, will we start?
Yeah, I think if we introduce everybody anyway, Nancy.
Yeah. I'm just going to give you a rundown of this morning or the afternoon event. I'm going to introduce the panel. I'm going to introduce Denise, who's our National Development Support Worker, Angela Black, who's the CEO of the Citizens Information Board, Senator Eileen Flynn, who's the first traveller that's been appointed to the House of Oireachtas, and Dr Stuart Stamp, who did the report, and then we're going to open it up to a discussion panel, and Michelle Cairns, the National Development Policy Accommodation Policy Worker, who was involved with the research with Stuart, is going to be involved on the panel. And on the left-hand corner of my screen is Dermot Treen, who I job share coordinator's position with National Traveller MABS. So let's start this morning. And I would just like to thank you all very much for logging on to this virtual launch of our report, Building the Box, to look at financial inclusion. And we're going to go into this in more detail later on with the panel. And I'm just going to introduce the panel now. Denise, if you put your hands up when I'm kind of interviewing you people or talking about you people and know who you are. Denise is the new appointed National Development Worker with National Traveller MABS. And Denise is going to talk on behalf of our chair, Bridget Casey, who sends her sincere apologies that she couldn't be involved in the launch this morning, and she wishes us all the best of luck. Angela Black is the chief executive of the Citizen Information Board. She has a broad range of experience from library admin to consumer financial services, and has represented Ireland on the EU stage in negotiations on e-money, consumers, credit, insurance, the banking regulations, mortgages, credit and financial market, and legal instruments. Senator Eileen Flynn. Senator Eileen Flynn is the first traveller to serve in the House of Oireachtas. Her background is in community development and as an activist on behalf of Irish travellers and in solidarity with other ethnic groups. She is also deeply committed to the cause of women's rights and equality. Dr Stuart Stamp is an independent researcher and research associate with the Department of Applied Social Science of Maynooth University. Over the past 30 years, Stuart has helped to establish services in both Ireland and the UK to assist people in over-indebtedness in recent years. Stuart has focused more on research and policy and analysing on these topics, and has worked with Combat Poverty, the Money Advice and Budgeting Services, MABS, the Free Legal Aid Services, FLAC, and the Dublin Region Home as Executive. I am now going to hand you over to Denise for Denise to launch or talk about the report. Denise.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. And you're more than welcome to the launch of the report into financial inclusion. You're all very welcome here today. I would particularly like to welcome Senator Eileen Flynn. Eileen is the first traveller to be a member of the Oireachtas and has kindly agreed to launch this report for us today. I would also like to welcome Angela Black, the Chief Executive Officer of the Citizens Information Board that fund National Traveller MABS and have funded this research piece. Angela and her staff are always very interested and supportive of our work. And I would like to welcome Stuart Stamp, who undertook this research piece. We are fortunate to have Stuart involved as one of Ireland's leading experts on financial inclusion. Stuart, you're very welcome here this afternoon. To start with, I think this report is timely, which financial inclusion has been an issue for travellers and other marginalised groups. This pandemic has given rise to talk of a cashless society, as we have seen a rise in online and banking and e-commerce. This has implications for travellers and other marginalised groups, many of whom use cash. And just a little background into our research piece. National Traveller MABS works to address the financial exclusion of travellers. We will talk of financial exclusion. We recognise the links between financial exclusion, social exclusion and poverty. Travellers experience a high level of financial exclusion, but also experience social exclusion and poverty. This is important in understanding responses to financial exclusion. So our work uses a poverty and social inclusion analysis. We work to create improvements and changes so that travellers can access financial services that meets their needs. In 2020, we decided to take stock of the current situation. This included in looking at the policy context in which financial exclusion exists and what is available in terms of services, facilities, and schemes. We wanted to understand what is working or not working and what can be improved. This was to inform our community education, development, and policy work, particularly in terms of where best to focus our resources in being more effective and in highlighting the kinds of policy changes needed to improve the financial inclusions of travellers. The research itself. The report was undertaken during the first period of lockdown in 2020. We would like to acknowledge those who was included to the report, which was On Post, the Banking and Payment Federation of Ireland, the Central Bank, the Central Statistics Office, Anafundite, the Commissions for the Regulations of Utilities, the Department of Finance, the Department of Employment Affairs and Social Protection, the Good Shepherd in Limerick, and the PAEC. We also would like to thank staff of MABS who participated in the study. The research reviewed the services, facilities and schemes in 3 areas, which were banking, payment and credit. Stuart will explain the report later in more detail, but from National Traveller MABS perspective, it has given us a clear understanding of how what is currently available can support the financial inclusion of travellers, and it also has shown the gaps in provision that need to be addressed. The report explains what best in terms of schemes, facilitates and what they should be. And this is from the report, joined up within a strategic policy framework, informed by the evidence on financial exclusion, inclusion, universal and without stigma, inclusive in the target groups, should have a sense of ownership and be able to make ongoing input in terms of how services best respond to their needs, appropriate to identified needs, understandable, including by those with literacy issues, easy to open and access with a minimum of paperwork and fuss, trusted in what they should be available through sources that are seen as trustworthy. For example, our report noted the accessibility of both the credit union and post office current accounts for financially excluded groups, including travellers. Most importantly, most importantly is highlighted the need for a national financial inclusion strategy to provide a framework by which the state enables financial inclusion. This finding will focus on our future policy work. Thank you.
I'd just like to thank you, Denise. And Denise highlighted a couple of key points. To highlight the issues of financial exclusion. There has been a long issue for travellers and other marginalised groups. The recent pandemic has highlighted the use in the move into cashless society, a rise in online banking and e-commerce. This will have implications for both travellers and marginalised and other marginalised groups, many of whom use cash. A little bit of research has been done in the background in terms of financial exclusion, and National Traveller MABS works to address the financial exclusion of travellers. I am now going to hand you, and thanks again, Denise, I am now going to hand you over to Angela Black.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for the invitation and the opportunity to speak. You know, this is the first ever virtual launch of a National Traveller MABS policy report, and it's on financial inclusion, and I'm deliberately emphasising the name. It's called Building the Box. I don't know if some of you won't realise that we had lots of emails to and fro, and one of the emails said, I'm inviting you to launch the Breaking the Box report. So I thought, well, it's probably just as well that we build it first before we break it. So as far as I can see, and I didn't get the picture at the front of the report, and you'll see it later when Senator Flynn launches it, but the picture at the front really is interesting. There's people of all different heights standing on the same height box, which is supposed to be equality. But then what you need to do is so that those people can see out over the wall and see the match. You need to put them on different size boxes depending on what their circumstances. They could be tall, they could be small. Or you might need to put them nearer the field because they might be short-sighted like myself, etc. So I think it was a great mistake, if you like, that somebody said this is called Breaking the Box, because it really drew me to the picture. Is the box broken on the front of the report? No, it's about building the box and making sure that we put everyone on the same size to be able to look over the wall, no matter what size they were to begin with. You know, I was at a meeting this morning with people talking about banking and culture in banking. And the whole meeting was, you know, it was very important and productive, and people were, you know, made very good points about, you know, banking customers and about what we should do to make banks more attractive for customers. But all the way along, knowing that I was going to speak to you today, I couldn't help but think, how can you turn a person into a customer? How can you make a customer, a person become a customer? How do you bridge the gap between being a person and a banking customer? So for instance, it's not just about travellers, but what this report deals with could equally apply to anyone on low income who maybe left school early, people parenting alone, unemployed, local authority tenants, older people, single person households, people who are unable to work due to disability. They all need different size boxes to stand on, but every one of them has a right to have a box of their own. So Nancy, we won't be breaking it, but I hope we will help you to support you in building the box. Can I thank Stuart Stamp? As usual, he did fantastic research work along with Michelle Kearns from National Traveller MABS. And this is a very detailed report. And this serves, as I said, not just the travelling community, but an awful lot of marginalised people in society. I suppose just a little bit about us. I suppose this is the boring bit, but it's where the pounds, shillings and pence come from. So I suppose I better say that the role of Citizens Information Board, we call CIB, is to make sure that we provide information. We usually do that through our website, citizensinformation.ie. So that's the way we do it directly. But indirectly, as Nancy said, we fund National Traveller MABS and MABS and CIS and lots of other companies. We fund them so that they can directly provide better outcomes for citizens, so that they can fully participate, so that you all can fully participate and enjoy your rightful entitlements. You know, where sometimes in terms of social welfare, where you have difficulty getting I don't know, a medical card or something else, our purpose in Citizens Information Service is to ensure that you get what's called income maximization, to maximize your income, just in case that the form fill in or some other hurdle that you couldn't get over. So we do that kind of thing. But equally, and in this environment where financial products are so complex, we try to give you support through funding National Traveller MABS, who have done a fantastic job since 2005 in providing community education and many other support services. But the rest of our work, not just about giving information, CIB gives people advice. CIB advocates for people through debt advice or other kind of supports, for instance, advocating for people who have a disability. So those are our obligations. And you today, by having this report launch, are giving CIB a chance to fulfill some of our obligations. And this report, I think, prompts us to look afresh at financial exclusion as it relates to the travelling community. But as I said, I think it has more weight to it because it could equally apply to many marginalised groups and disadvantaged groups in Irish society. It gives us an overview, I think, of what's out there in the market, what works for travellers and what can be improved upon to bring about real financial inclusion. In other words, the earlier financial inclusion of 2011, that strategy needs a dusting off, to say the least, and needs a revision and a revival and needs some energy put behind it. And that's why I'm absolutely delighted that we have Senator Flynn here today, because that's the heft and the weight behind these proposals and reports that we needed all along and that we finally have today. So I think this report about real financial inclusion, in case we haven't been listening up to now, I think it tells us what travellers want and what they need from their financial services. If I start, and I won't be too negative all the time, but if I start by pointing out what does not work for travellers, according to this report, and that is the design of financial services, which many people find not easy to understand and not easy to use. But financial education has a huge part to play in helping people bridge that gap between not being able to use a product and being able to use it easily. But another thing that would play a part is simpler products. Simpler products would be far more attractive to large groups of people. Some people aren't interested in playing the stock market or in complex transactions for the rest of their lives. They just want maybe an account to lodge and withdraw money, to pay the bills, to get a loan for basic needs from time to time. It seems to me that basic banking is your right, and that right has been recognised through legislation. But sometimes the legislation was so busy giving you the minimal rights that we got a basic bank account that really didn't do everything we needed it to do. Like, you know, we can go to the post office and buy the stamps. Sometimes we need a little more than just buying stamps. And yet we don't want to be Bill Gates and Microsoft Corporation and involved in all kinds of tricky international transactions. But something in between has to be available to us all. So I think COVID-19, as Denise has just said, it brought home even more the importance of a basic bank account for contactless payments and for online shopping. I wonder, you know, we haven't done a poll for a while, I think, but how many of you have recently tried to open a basic bank account and what was the response from the bank? I know the legislation allows access to basic banking, such as it is, but in practice, I have heard reports that it's not available, especially to the target group that was intended, the unbanked, mostly older population. And that other thing as well, that kind of oversimplified it. I think the legislation presumed that you must have never had a bank account in order to open one. Well, people drifted in and out. I mean, lots of us have had several bank accounts, depending where we lived, etc. But you don't have to have, you shouldn't be told you have to have never had a bank account in order to be able to open one. Or at least it's a very easy way to further exclude a load of people who some small little detail of circumstances denies them the access. Another little detail, of course, which everyone isn't a detail at all, this thing about how to know your customer. The bank's methods of knowing their customer to allow them use their ID to open a bank account are as various as there are banks. It's not consistent. So it's very important that we actually focus on, you know, enough financial literacy, not just to understand the product, but to get over the hoops that might be internally imposed in bank once you go in the door.
We've got full coverage here.
Okay, so as I said, the financial literacy and education is important so that you can understand and compare products, because we're not talking about just getting the first thing that the banks want to sell you. It would be better if you could actually go to Bank A and Bank B and Bank C and see which one is the best. I mean, that's something that we all take for granted. And I would hope that for the whole of society, that becomes a reality. Now, the Competition and Consumer Protection Commission is an agency, something like ourselves, but they deal more around consumer protection and goods and faulty goods, etc. But they do an awful lot more, in case anybody quotes me. They do market surveys, etc. But they go some way to providing information and comparison on different financial products. But then you have to ask the question, how many people really want to see all this stuff on a website if they're not digitally literate? Or how many people actually have access to broadband and internet to be able to use the websites? So the channel of communication is important too. Now, I'm only supposed to do 10 minutes. You won't believe it. I'm only coming to my second point. I'm very sorry. I must be slow. So the second point that I want to make, first was about the products. Secondly, where the products were meant to help people manage their budget are sometimes being used as a means to charge them more. And here what I'm talking about is the poverty premium. Why there are top-up cards, cards for meters, loans from moneylenders. And the Combat Poverty Agency, I think 2006, many years ago, did a report on why the poor pay more. And it's so sad that it's still true that the poor still do pay more. I think it's deeply unjust to offer convenience as the reason for charging supplements on the pay-as-you-go cards, etc. I think it's also offensive sometimes, the rates that can be charged by moneylenders, legal and illegal. What would be a fairer solution, hopefully, would be that more retailers would get on the bandwagon and say, we're not going to exploit or profit from, any misery of people who can't afford annual bill contracts. If you pay your bill annually, it'll be cheaper than if you pay by card every week. Well, what's that about? That's not really a support. So if you could pay your ESB bill or whatever, or your phone bill annually, that's cheaper. But I mean, tell that to somebody who's managing on a weekly wage. So I think it's very telling that none of the providers of utilities, etc., have conducted a user review of the pay-as-you-go systems. I suppose there's no point in conducting a user review when you know the answer, you know the outcome. Pay-as-you-go systems are more expensive. So as for moneylenders, there is work currently underway by many of us trying to reduce the interest rates and to ensure that everyone knows that moneylender loans are high-cost loans. And finally, I'd like to single out the Central Bank of Ireland, which we wouldn't often do, to say, well done on highlighting the fact that these are high-cost loans. And what I would say, in addition to that, is you should try and think twice before taking them on. And if you're in any doubt about your rights before you sign up for a loan, you should get in touch, excuse me, with MABS, who can explain everything to you. And I'll give you the number 0761 07 2000. Nobody can say that often enough. It should be stamped on everyone's brain, 0761 07 2000. Just to say, my page has jumped now, so I'm going to talk away to myself for a little while I find the page. But yes, the report, when it talks about money lending, has referred to community-based alternatives to mainstream banks, such as the fairly new An Post or the credit union current accounts as a solution. Now, it's safe to say that both An Post and the credit unions are trusted, and their basic current account is accessible and their branch network is widespread around the country. And I would say also that the household budget scheme for social welfare recipients has been very successful since its inception in 1994, and there are over 60,000 customers of that. But if we had just a little bit more flexibility and the ability to adjust your circumstances or your account, or to cancel quickly, or to change your direct debits, etc., it could meet the needs of more people in terms of bill payments. I think MABS clients also favour the bill pay option through An Post, although it's been tested this year when people were confined to their houses and they couldn't really go to a post office. So that's probably not a great test of it. On COVID, I suppose we've all suffered one way or another, and I am very sorry and offer our condolences on behalf of CIB for all of you and your family and friends who may have suffered bereavement or loss or illness in the family or among friends. I think, you know, not just families, but businesses are also on their knees. And the government, I think, has tried very hard recently, particularly, to provide supports in the form of subsidies and grants and cheaper credit, etc. But my question is, what about ordinary consumers, such as yourselves? I think there is little support in place at present if you need a cheaper loan. I'm quite proud of the personal microcredit It Makes Sense loan. I chair the task force that's trying to extend that and expand that. And that gives loans by credit unions at a maximum 1% interest rate per month. But it's not widely enough available, and we need to do more. So this report also highlights credit exclusion, it highlights credit exclusion for the travelling community. And of course, in theory, access to a basic bank account should lead to access to credit, but it's not really happening. Credit unions would traditionally have provided low-cost credit to members, but there's a lot of regulatory requirements now, and credit unions are often constrained in how much they can lend and who they can lend to and what kind of loans they can lend. I think sometimes I've heard that credit unions are encouraged to give large loans rather than small loans. So if access to credit was available, then you would say nobody would be using moneylenders, legal or illegal. I would also say that finance providers need to try and imitate the convenience of money lending, the lack of paperwork, the quick response for emergency needs without charging these huge exorbitant rates of interest. So in a way, I never thought I'd be looking to the best in class as being the money lender. They are the best in class when it comes to convenience. So that's their attractiveness. And that sometimes makes you forget that this is a real high cost loan and it's going to cost me an absolute fortune. So people are drawn to it for convenience, but don't be fooled. It is high interest, high cost, and any other way is likely to be a cheaper way of getting your credit. And we need to work to make that access more widespread. Another reference was the Good Shepherd no interest loan scheme, which is very interesting. But again, it's limited in terms of access, or you can't really scale it up for the whole country at present. And I know there's a pilot. I mean, we harped on for a long time and met with the Department of Housing about the caravan loan scheme. And now it's been piloted by 5 local authorities. Well, that's fantastic, because it was really obvious throughout the reviews of the caravan loan scheme that the uptake was just miserly and pitiful, and that despite the fact that there was a law there since, I think, 2002 or 1998 it started, but since 2002 there was a commitment from the Department of the Environment to provide caravan loans through local authorities. And now the fact that we have 5 pilots 20 odd years later, sure, I could say I'm grateful, but not so much, you know. But these 5 pilots will provide higher amounts of credit. The old loans of €5,000 limit weren't really realistic. And these loans will provide credit up to 30,000 for the purchase of caravans. But, you know, I have to commend Dermot and Nancy for the work. When you thought about how we can get our voice heard by policymakers and decision makers and how we can improve policies, you're the reason that this has got highlighted. I think you were the reason, you know, almost uniquely, who kept on about this problem, about the inequity of the loan scheme, of the unavailability of it, of the low threshold used. And you actually produced those reports about the realistic cost of, I can't remember what you called it, suitable, appropriate accommodation, affordable and culturally appropriate. That's what it was called, culturally appropriate accommodation, instead of this £5,000 loan that was no good to anybody for the purchase of caravans. So now there's an opportunity, when this pilot finishes, I would hope that it goes on and gets scaled up to include every local authority in the country. It's an opportunity and also a challenge for the travelling community, but MABS is here to help to assess the affordability and help you go through your options if you want to be a candidate for one of these loans. So I should probably mention where it's operating. The 5 local authorities is Cork City, Dublin City, Kildare, Limerick City and County, and South Dublin County. So I'll finish up now, but just to say that this report goes to the heart of the National Traveller MABS, which we've been very proud to support for the last 15 years. And your work in National Traveller MABS in terms of financial literacy education is really essential to break down barriers. And National Traveller MABS is uniquely placed and well connected in the traveller community to support initiatives by the financial and the state sector to address the needs of this group of citizens.
Thank you very much, Angela. And you've made some excellent points. It was a great presentation. And you talked about equality among the financial sector from design perspective and the difficulty in understanding and the use and the increases costs associated with using products. Services. You also highlighted the lack of political implementation of the basic bank accounts, which is something that we hope can be resourced going forward. You also said why the poor are paying more and the poor are still paying more, and the more wider use of the It Makes Sense loans, and the pilot projects around the caravan loan schemes that it will be made widely available to travellers around the country. Thank you again, Angela Black. Just before I pass you on to Senator Eileen Flynn to launch the report, I would sincerely like to thank Senator Eileen Flynn for taking her time out of her very, very busy schedule to launch the report, Building the Blocks. I will hand you now over to Senator Eileen Flynn.
Thank you, Nancy. I'd like to thank Dr. Stuart Stamp and National Traveller MABS for undertaking this review. Firstly, listening to Angela speak has made me really think about, the inequalities that exist within the traveller community as a whole. And sometimes we ask ourselves the questions, around why is there so much inequalities within the traveller community? And financial inequalities is something that we never take, well, personally myself, I know National Traveller MABS does, but I never take a moment to think about. When I talk about financial inequality around the financial services, the credit unions, the banks, etc. And if we look at the suicide rates within the traveller community, traveller men are 7 times more likely to die by suicide than men in the general population. Traveller women 6 times more likely to die by suicide than women in the general population. Building the block, Angela and Denise, I was questioning the whole building the box. I was questioning why did MABS come up with that name, and it makes sense now. And for me, I look at it as that not one shoe fits all, nor does one box. Not one box fits every individual that comes to a service. And when I give traveller training, my say to National Traveller, to MABS, just MABS, and I know MABS in general, I did some training with MABS before, and we always speak about meeting the clients where the clients are at, and I think that advice would be very helpful for the financial services as well, to meet each client where they're at, and not to be they're just the members of the traveller community. for me, like, I know it's a review of policies, services, facilities, and schemes to improve issues, to improve the financial barriers and exclusion of the traveller community. So the report, in my opinion, was a well overdue report, and to thank MABS and to thank Dr. Stuart Stamp again. As we know, travellers remain one of the most disadvantaged communities in Ireland. National Traveller MABS, from my own experience, even over the years, is a safe, and I know it's not about boasting National Traveller MABS, but we have to a certain extent, it's a safe place for members of the traveller community to go, to reach out, and it's a safe place where they can find out information around financial institutions, etc. And it is a pathway. National Traveller MABS is a pathway for the traveller community to, if you want, like, because some members of the traveller community, including my own family, wouldn't really be familiar with the financial services available, wouldn't be familiar with how to use the banks, how to open up a credit union, because of all the paperwork that goes with it, but also just not being, that information is not widely available to members of the traveller community, as well as members from other ethnic minority groups and marginalised communities. Although there's measures that does exist, and Angela's mentioned one of those just there a few moments ago around It Makes Sense loan, and that's in some credit unions, it's not in all. The research shows the research points to the people who are most financially excluded, who are the members of the traveller clients and more other disadvantaged groups. This research provides us with the starting point. However, now it is like the research is only a starting point. What we need is a national strategy, financial strategy going forward, and that strategy needs to be the voice of the traveller community. It needs to be included of members of the traveller community. If the Yellow Flag programme has shown us that with traveller participation and travellers being involved in making policy demands, but then it's a better outcome for members of the traveller community. So to build the poverty gap, the inequality gap that exists within our financial direction, and this research gives us out to work with people and have better outcomes for people from the traveller community and other marginalised communities. But most and foremost, this piece of research is key to how important that MABS is and how important it is for the financial institutions, as I say, work with MABS. And, you know, I always say nothing about us without us. And, you know, within our community, there is a lower rate of over 80% of travellers are unemployed, and 20% of us are working really hard. But still, like, we're seen as less in the general population, which includes the financial market. And we're talking, like, when we're talking about economics around big tables, and we're talking about the banking market and credit unions and loans and stuff, we have to make sure that it meets the needs of the traveller community, that the traveller community is also central to any discussion that's happening. So again, just to thank National Traveller MABS for inviting me here today, and it's been an absolute pleasure and a learning experience for me personally, and opened up my eyes even more to the inequalities that travellers face that we wouldn't even think about on a daily basis, of opening up as simple as a bank account, you know. So it gives me a great honour to launch this report, and I look forward to working with National Traveller MABS. It is the first step, me working with National Traveller MABS in the role as being a senator, but I look forward to working with you in the future, and to, if you want to say, build a box, and build a box that we can all be part of, and people will have equal access to that box. And again, my last point today is, is that credit unions and banks need to meet the clients where they're at. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Eileen Flynn. And you've made some extremely important points in terms of the report being long overdue, the inequalities that travellers are facing, the much needed for a financial exclusion strategy, and that MABs need to take people at where they're at, the importance of understanding what people need, and that building the box that we can be all involved in terms of financial exclusion, and that it's important to have travellers at the table, travellers' voices to be at the table, like in terms of, you were saying, the yellow flag, that they had traveller input in terms of the yellow flag and how that implemented change and policy. And I'd just like again to thank you very much, Senator Flynn, for launching the report. We are now going to open it up and have a discussion with the panel, and we're going to bring in Michelle Cairns, who was involved in the research with Dr. Stuart Stamp. And once again, thank you all very much for attending the first virtual report of National Traveller MABS, as Angela Black highlighted. And thank you very much again.
Stuart is going to talk first.
Oh, sorry.
And then we're going to have the panel discussion.
Sorry, Stuart.
No problem at all, Nancy. Everybody said everything already, so I'm not sure there's very much left for me to say. But I'm just going to very briefly talk through just a few themes really that came from the report. And just to thank everybody for attending this morning, and obviously everybody who's spoken so far. I say you've made my job much easier than it might have been, because I can just pick out, I hope now, a few points. So yeah, I mean, a few things just to say about it. The first thing is the motivation. You know, why did National Traveller MABS decide to look at this particular issue again in 2020? And I think, as the Senator has said, it's because we hadn't really looked at it for a little while, and National Traveller MABS were very keen to inform, you know, their own work plan, our own work plan going forward. But this report is very much looking at it through a traveller lens. But as Angela says, it could equally apply to other marginalised groups and individuals. So it is very useful to read the study with that in mind. Although it's from a traveller perspective, and very much so, it also...
Sorry, maybe I'm deaf, Stuart. I have a hard time hearing you. Can you turn up your volume a little bit? Is it only me? Sorry.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Just about. Is the volume too low, Dermot?
It's very low, Stuart.
It's a bit low, Stuart. So
I'm on full here.
All right.
Sorry.
It's okay. I can hear you. Sorry if I'm the only one.
Can everybody else hear me on the panel there? Wave if you can hear me. All waving. Good stuff. Yeah. Okay. So sorry, Angela. Sorry about that. I hope you can hear me a little better now. I'm a bit nearer the mic. So the first thing is the motivation was really to just find out really where we're at in terms of financial exclusion from a traveller perspective in 2020. We wanted to look at some initiatives that we felt might be useful from a traveller perspective in terms of financial inclusion. And we wanted to identify the positives around those, whether there were any issues around those, and also if there were any gaps that we need to work together to fill as a society. So our informants have been thanked already, and I just want to reiterate that. Hugely grateful to all the service providers and the public service officials who responded to us about the different initiatives that we were interested in looking at. I'll talk about those in a second. To MABS practitioners, money advisors up and down the land who fed in by way of responses to questions we were asking around different schemes and initiatives, the good points, the not so good points, how many people were using them, if they had any suggestions. Again, we're very, very grateful, because that was very important to get the user perspective on these particular financial services. And finally, National Traveller MABS itself were a key informant, obviously with its range of a network of traveller groups and experience and knowledge and information gained over time. So they were our three sources, if you like: the provider perspective, the user perspective through money advisors and MAB staff, and the traveller perspective principally through National Traveller MABS itself. So the report is split into 5. Part 1 talks about the financialisation of Irish society. In other words, how important financial services have become within Irish society. They've become almost necessary to participate fully in society. So obviously, if you're not able to participate, if you're not able to access services, or even if you're not able to use them, then it means you become even more excluded than maybe you already were in the first place. So I'll just talk a little bit about that in a second, but that's very important, that context, how important financial services have become to Irish society. Part 2 of the report then looks at public policy. It looks at what have we done as a society to try and address the issue of financial exclusion, particularly from a traveller perspective. And I'll talk a bit about that and briefly. Angela already mentioned the strategy for financial inclusion, the need to dust it down and bring it back again. I'll be talking a little bit about that. There have been other initiatives as well, but as you'll see, they don't really, they go some of the way, but there's an awful lot more to do in terms of ensuring full financial inclusion of travellers. So that's part 2 of the study. Then in part 3, we look at the banking and payment side of things, and we take some initiatives that are out there already. That's the credit union and post office current accounts. You've heard a little bit about those already on the banking side. On the payment side, we look at the household budget scheme, the An-Post bill pay scheme, and prepayment utility or token meters as well. So we look at sort of schemes, both banking and payments, that we think might be relevant or have use to travellers, and look at the good points and also where these could possibly be improved. Then in part 4, we turn to credit. And as has been said, we look at the It Makes Sense loan scheme, the pilot micro credit, which is now microcredit scheme. As Angela says, it's available in large parts of the country, but obviously coverage is not universal, as many of you will know. And we look at that particular scheme, and we also look at the no interest loan scheme, a much smaller scheme, a pilot in Limerick, through Good Shepherd Microfinance. And we're interested really in the way these particular schemes work, okay, as models, if you like, of lending to people who are marginalised or either don't want to use the mainstream or are marginalised. I'm conscious of time, so it's lunchtime, so I'm going to skate through some of the key points. So we pose 3 questions really. First, why does financial exclusion matter? Why does it matter? Why are we talking about it in the first place? If you live in a financialised society, one where financial services are hugely important in order to participate fully, whether it's to get employment or just manage your daily life and your finances. In that context, if you're excluded, your exclusion is quite acute. And by that, I mean, we have 2 sort of data, or we have different pieces of data in the report. But 1.6 billion payment transactions in 2018 is a figure that really hit me when we came across it. Most of them electronic. So if you are dealing in cash in person as a way of managing money, you're not part of all of that. But that's where the mainstream is at. And our argument is, if you choose to manage your money in cash and in person, if that suits you, that's perfectly fine, absolutely. But you should have the choice of using those other services if you wish to do so. And that's really our argument. It's giving people real and full choice. So most of the population, 94%, has a current bank account. That means nearly 6% doesn't. That's around 100,000 households. So we're talking about quite big numbers of people who are financially excluded. Slightly higher figure in terms of credit exclusion. These are people not able to avail of credit or the full amount of credit that they need, or that actually don't apply for credit at all because they feel that they're going to be rejected. And we think there's the Central Statistics Office data suggests there's about 8% of the population in that situation. That's about 130,000+ households. So we're talking about large numbers of households that are excluded. And of course, if you're already marginalised, and we know the travel community is particularly marginalised, but other groups are as well, then if you can't access or use financial services, it deepens that exclusion or marginalisation. I hope that makes sense. It adds another layer, if you like, to it. So you've then got multiple disadvantage. And in a report just published last week, and many of you will have seen it, the EU Agency for Fundamental Rights published a study where they report that 63% of travellers are unbanked. in Ireland, and that's way out of scale, even compared to travellers in other parts of Europe that were studied. So it just shows you the extent of the exclusion here, or disadvantage. Money lending has already been mentioned. Another dimension to financial exclusion, we know that's both extensive and expensive, and that has already been discussed. And we know that travellers often have little alternative but to rely on other sources, legal and illegal, as Angela said. My paper's maybe rustling a bit. Sorry about that. If that's getting in the way. So that, if you like, is the societal side of things. If we look then at the individual side of things, there are a lot of consequences for people individually. The lack of real choice is something we've mentioned, or I mentioned before. People not having, real and full choice, that is being sort of magnified by the pandemic, I think. Increased cost for people, that has already been mentioned. If you can't avail of cheaper credit, or you can't avail of certain financial services, which means that you can't avail of cheaper products. For instance, some things are cheaper on direct debit, as some of you will know. If you can't avail of those sort of products, then you pay more for basic services. We hear a lot about consumers being able to switch products. Well, again, if you're excluded from the mainstream, if you want to change your utility provider, if that's the situation you're in, again, you can't do that if you're not in the system already. We talked about the barrier to social participation in full. Another aspect to all of this, of course, is broadband. And if you live in certain parts of the country, you may not be able to access remoter or online services, which have become, obviously much more in focus as a result of COVID. And we know that travellers in particular circumstances, and particularly those living in mobile homes and trailers, from previous work we've done and from other studies, tend to be excluded in that sense as well, in terms of even having access to those sort of online facilities in the first place. So again, exclusion can be deepened. And the last point to make just at the individual level is the impact on people's well-being. And we know there's a body of research now that tells us that if you're financially excluded, it means that may lead you into financial difficulty and debt problems, which can have a huge effect on both your physical and indeed mental health and your well-being. That's a very important dimension. I've turned the page now, so I won't be rustling this. What have we done as a society about financial exclusion? This is really the sort of second part of the report, where we talk a bit about the National Financial Inclusion Strategy, I should say, 2011 to 2013. Some of you will have know about it. Some of you will have been sort of involved in or around it. And at the core of that strategy, which was a really progressive national strategy convened by the Department of Finance with stakeholder groups, including groups from marginalised sections of society, the cornerstone of that was a thing called a basic payment, a standard bank account. And the idea was it was supposed to be a gateway accounts that would lead people, potentially if they wished, into a pathway, as has been mentioned, where you could avail of credit and savings and insurance and payment services and all the rest of it. And unfortunately, that sort of was overtaken by events. It sort of petered out a little bit and was sort of replaced, if you like, by moves at European level, which have given now all citizens within the European Union the right to a basic payment account. But that's a much narrower type of product. That's really just about payments. As Angela said, getting money in and paying money out. It doesn't have the more gateway sort of feel to it that the financial inclusion strategy standard bank account had, which is regrettable in our view. And also that it's not informed, if you like, as much by the views of people who are marginalised in the first instance, which our national strategy was in a much greater way. So that was one of the things we're very keen to argue for, to recommend that we reawaken that national financial inclusion strategy. Just very briefly, all the schemes we looked at, whether it was payment, banking or credit, they all had lots of good points, and we believed that they could be of use to travellers or certain travellers in certain situations at different times, perhaps. Okay, so part of this is to try and inform ourselves and thereby hopefully get the message out there to people within the community as to where these things maybe could help them in their daily lives. But just a few general themes. Very few of them are actually financially inclusive in terms of their ethos. So they don't come from a financial inclusion space. They come from a particular, a very good motivation, but they tend not to be coming from a sort of a direction which thinks of financial inclusion more broadly, which is what we're very much interested in. So they're very positive, but they tend to be maybe not specific to financial inclusion. And a lot of them tend to come from the centre or to be sort of top down, if you like. So in other words, they tend not to be really needs-based, if you like, not so much, it's not so much about going to a community and saying, what do you need here in terms of banking and payment and credit? It's more around, well, here's a development which is very well-meaning and very well-intentioned, but maybe doesn't fully hit the spot in terms of people's needs, because it doesn't, that's not the way a lot of the schemes were developed. And that's not to cast any aspersions, as I say, on the motives or intentions of those behind the various initiatives. They're very positive and they have a great role to play, but they don't tend to come from that space where people's views, if you like, have been factored in. The other thing that tends not to happen is we don't tend to evaluate things very quickly. And it's one of the things we recommend in the study, that any financial inclusion measure should really have evaluation built into it right at the outset. In other words, it should be there at the start, and then as you go along, so you can get the views of people who are excluded quite quickly. You can build those in to the various schemes and initiatives, and you can make changes as and when problems start to arise. And perhaps the big thing to note really is that these schemes tend to operate by and large in isolation, although there are some exceptions. For instance, the It Makes Sense loan scheme operates very well with the household budget scheme, because that's how people make their repayments, as most of you or many of you will know. But what we're suggesting is that this needs to be much more joined up, if you like. These various schemes and initiatives need to be much more cohesive, if you like, and integrated, joined together. So where do we go from here? Well, the first thing is we think there's a community education role here that we need to make people aware, and particularly in the traveller community, but also in other communities, of these various options and their positives and maybe the shortfalls. So ensure that people have full choice, they have informed choice, they can see what options are there and maybe decide for themselves whether these are useful to them or not. To work with providers around issues and challenges, that's, I know, a big thing in the National Traveller MABS sort of work plan, is to get up and talk to the various providers and see, are there any changes that we've identified in the study that can be made to make some of these schemes and options and initiatives more appropriate and useful to people. We talked about reawakening the National Financial Inclusion Strategy. We think that's a very important thing. By the way, that document, we couldn't find it on the web, which is interesting in itself. Maybe it is there and we just couldn't find it. I have a hard copy in my shed, which is probably of no use to anybody, but we also have a PDF copy. So if anybody is interested in seeing that strategy, I have no problem in making that available. As I say, we couldn't locate it on the internet. And just the final thing is we need to build in, we think, evaluation and the traveller and marginalised group voice much more to these schemes, initiatives, and indeed to a national strategy as a whole. That's it. Sorry for skating through and sorry for the paper rustling, and it's okay when you're at a lectern with a microphone, but not obviously a bit distracting. So sorry about that, but I hope you could hear the points that were made. Let's hope that 2021 is a more socially inclusive and less socially distant year, and not just a socially inclusive year, but a more financially inclusive year as well. And just like to take the opportunity to wish you all and your families a very happy Christmas and all the best for 2021. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Stuart. And I once again really want to apologise for leaving you out of there of one of the most important, you're one of the most important presenters today, except the Senator Eileen Flynn, because without you, the report wouldn't have happened. Without you compiling the report and being a bones with yourself and Michelle, it wouldn't have happened. And I really want to apologise for trying to skip over you there. But you made some invaluable points in terms of your presentation, that how Ireland has become is a financial society where access to and the use of financial services has become sociable necessary. Financial exclusion adds to existing disadvantage amongst groups such as travellers, and that there has been well-meaning measures to address the issues, but as a society, we need to do much, much more in terms of looking at the financial exclusion or inclusion. We need to reawake our national strategy for financial inclusion, and to make sure that the views of the most marginalised, including travellers, are met. We need to be aware that in terms of financial exclusion, that it has an impact on people's well-being, and in terms of their mental health. And as everybody knows, or people are involved in the traveller movement, is that traveller mental health is at a crisis at the minute. As Senator Flynn said, we're 7 times higher than the national average, more higher than men, and 6 times higher than 7 times higher in terms of men, and 6 times higher in terms of traveller women. And I just want to say really thank you for an invaluable report. I really do hope that the government will consider of reawakening and readdressing and looking at the need of a financial inclusion strategy in terms of travellers and the most vulnerable, because it's always the most vulnerable that are targeted, and that who are at a disadvantage in every society. But as we know, travellers are one of the most, and is the most excluded group within our society at the moment. Thank you very, very much, Stuart. And again, I want to apologise. And I would now like to open it up and put you onto the discussion panel, where we now have Michelle Cairns, our national policy and accommodation worker, who was involved with the report with Stuart, to take some question and answers. Thank you very much. So in terms of the panel, I would just say, Michelle, is there anything that you would like to add to this report that the rest of the panel have already said or haven't said? And then we'll take it open up to questions.
Well, I suppose from our perspective, this was to inform how we do our work in terms of our policy, our education and our development work. And I suppose to join with others in terms of how we can create an impetus for a national financial inclusion strategy and work, I suppose, in solidarity with groups that work with other vulnerable groups around how we meet the needs of those that's most excluded. I mean, I previously was the development worker, and I worked all the time with people who didn't have access to credit when they needed it. For example, with caravan loans, we often get phone calls from people who can't borrow for their basic accommodation, and how difficult it is for us as staff to say, I'm sorry, that's not available in your county, or there's nowhere that we know that we can recommend you for credit, you know, to go to get credit for and to borrow for your mobile. And I think I know that Angela mentioned the pilots, and we're hoping that they work for people. That will hopefully happen in the new year in the 5 pilot areas. But as well as that, it's important to, like, even in terms of the basic bank account that's there at the minute, it's so difficult to navigate the forms that are there, who qualifies to get a form, you know, how long you can have that bank account for if your income changes. If you have a large family, are you over the income limit? Because it's based on the the minimum income. So I suppose we hear all the time how difficult it is for people to access basic services around banking, payments and credit. So from our perspective, it informs how we will do our work going forward. But we understand there needs to be a more coordinated and concerted effort to reach out to people and provide them with the services they need in a very accessible way. Stuart mentioned, you know, broadband or people's digital literacy skills and all of the factors that prevent people from accessing what's there already. So, I mean, I suppose it's up to us and other groups like us who work with the most vulnerable to work together to make it happen for people. Thanks.
Michelle, I would just like to say at the end of this launch that the report will be available on the National Traveller website, National Traveller MABS website, and we will also be sending a copy of it by email to all the traveller organisations and all the MABs and all the CISs. And I'm now going to hand you over to Dermot to take questions with regards to what stuff, if there's questions come in from the audience or the participants.
Thanks, Nancy, and thanks to everybody. I was just looking at the questions and answers there, and we had some congratulations from Catherine Mannion of the National Traveller Women's Forum, and she just said, congratulations to National Traveller MABS on the launch of this report and all your important work in highlighting the financial exclusion of the traveller community. Your work and expertise in relation to the caravan loan scheme is very important. So I just answered to that, but there was one thing that I wanted to ask specifically, and it's in relation to policy development. And I wanted to ask Stuart in particular, because I think that the timing of this report is very opportune, because the COVID restriction, or what we saw happening in COVID, was that there was a very distinct gap between those people who were able to swipe for everything and who were able to use their banking cards, and the people who were not, and the people who I feel like are actually punished for if they work on a cash basis. And so I think that this report, I was kind of shocked in terms of the numbers of people that still don't have a bank account. We're talking about 100,000 households, and we're talking about 130,000 households that don't have access to any form of credit. So I think that this is well timed. But the other thing that came across, and I'm just going to ask Stuart this, were you also surprised about the number of people who would be MABS clients that would be eligible for things like a basic bank account, who actually weren't, for one reason or another, weren't actually availing of those kind of services, Stuart? So that's my question.
Yeah, yes, is the answer. You can hear me okay? Yeah. Yes is the answer. And I think part of the problem is that financial inclusion has sort of dropped off the policy agenda, really, and it's dropped off most of our mindsets. And one of the things about COVID is, although it's not named, financial exclusion is a part of a lot of the fallout of COVID, I think. And a piece of research that I've been doing with the MABS in the Dublin region, which will hopefully be publishing in the new year, is really looking at that. It's looking at the impacts of COVID on people who, are managing money in particular ways, and COVID has had a major impact on them. So, yeah, I mean, I think if you don't think about things, and financial exclusion, personally, I don't think is the best term. It's become the accepted term of describing these things. When I ask the students in Maynooth, what does financial exclusion mean to you? Most of them say, well, poverty, deprivation, lack of money. Whereas really what financial exclusion is, as we've seen today, is financial service exclusion. It's exclusion from financial services and real choice. So yes, Dermot, I was, but then, as I say, because it's not on, it's sort of dropped off the policy agenda. I think COVID actually has presented an opportunity. It's been an awful year for everybody, and please may it end soon. But it certainly has shone a window or shone a light onto dimensions or aspects of Irish society that maybe had been swept under the carpet a little bit. And we know that COVID hasn't affected all groups equally. It's affected those who are already marginalised the most. So financial exclusion or financial inclusion, we think, has to form part of the response going forward in the context of COVID. Yeah.
Great, thanks very much, Stuart. I'm going to sneak in one more quick question. I was going to ask this of Angela. We haven't got anything else. We've just nothing else came in, and Eileen, we'd like to thank Senator Eileen Flynn again, she had to go. She was en route from Donegal to Dublin when she dialed in for this. But yeah, Angela, my question is in relation to financial inclusion and in relation to the infrastructure that I think we need to have available from taking somebody from a position of where they are financially excluded. For instance, if you're part of the 130,000 households in Ireland that don't have access to any credit, you're more than likely going to be using an illegal moneylender or a legal moneylender. Or if you're part of the 63% of the travellers in Ireland who are unbanked, according to that, is there something that we can do that can bring financial services into the equation in terms of, as well as doing the work that MABS obviously already does, but is there some way that we can include financial services in being part of the solution in relation to how do we take somebody who's actually indebted to a moneylender and get them to a position where they're actually included within the financial services of a system?
Yeah. I suppose a lot of the things that have been said earlier, particularly just now by Stuart, the idea that the term financial exclusion isn't, doesn't speak to me easily. What really important to me is, as I said it earlier in my address, the inability to become a customer. How can I become a customer? A customer to lodge my money, a customer to take out money, a customer to get a loan. So we're not in the vision of many banks at the moment. We're only within the ambit, and that's sometimes begrudgingly and sometimes too slow, of credit unions and on post. So that's the area, that's our global vision for excluded citizens. So in other words, the citizens who cannot become customers of banks, the best that we think we can do, or the gradual improvement, would be in terms of their inclusion as customers of post offices and credit unions. And we have a way yet to go to get them to be customers of banks, mainstream banks. And for that to happen, as you've said, and that's why the research is very important, some of the dots are beginning to be joined now. And I think this is why it's time to revive the financial inclusion policy. One of the dots that's been joined is you finally have Senator Flynn, who's there to be your voice. For a long time, I think the travelling community had many, many voices, sometimes not joined up. But now the collaboration that's always going to be needed to join up the Department of Housing. Senator Flynn can talk to someone in the Department of Housing around the caravan loan scheme. Senator Flynn can look at this report and put it into 160 pigeonholes in Dáil Éireann for all the TDs to read. Senator Flynn, I think, is I'm sorry to give her too much work in her first couple of months, but she's your conduit to the solution to what we didn't have before. We had fantastic work from Pavi Point, the Irish Traveller Movement, from lots and lots of agencies, but each one, including myself, are too small to make any big strides, to get on top of that box, to build the box to get travellers looking out over the wall at the match. On our own, we can't do anything, but with Senator Flynn and this report that you've done, and the pilot on the caravan loan scheme, and the extension of personal microcredit on It Makes Sense, with all of with the persuasive power of that, including the research that's been done on money lending. And that's a slow burn, that's a gradual thing. It'll take time for the money lender interest rates to be brought down gradually, while the credit union has to be acknowledged as needing to be able to make money, so their interest rates might go up, but somewhere they'll meet in the middle, and hopefully in that middle it will include access to people to get on top of those boxes and build the box for the travelling community included.
Brilliant, thank you very much, Angela. I think it's now, yes, we've gone kind of 10 or 12 minutes over time, so I'd like to thank all the panelists again for their contribution. I particularly like to thank...
a question just come in there. See the question there and question and answers. I don't know who it's from. See it? Can you see it in question and answers?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Okay, so this is, yes, this is Margaret Collins and says, I think this is a great report, very much needed. Hopefully going forward, it can be used as a voice for the unbanked and also financially excluded, going back to the It Makes Sense loans, it was set up to help people to access small loans from credit unions. It would also help people who gained access to this loan to build their credit rating. However, this loan is not widely available to people. How do you think this report can help us revitalise, I think, this or create a new pilot lending scheme for the unbanked access? So essentially the question is that the It Makes Sense loans, it's highlighted in the report, isn't really necessarily meeting the needs of travellers in relation to getting access to affordable credit. Can this report help revitalise that or change that?
Well, can I just say, because I chaired the task force to expand It Makes Sense loan, I would say that the It Makes Sense loan, unfortunately, makes no money for credit unions. And we're totally indebted to credit unions for the goodwill involved in the amount of take-up that has already taken place. And we have to find a model through which credit unions can actually operate commercially and, in other words, be able to make something from these very small loans and yet not be operating at the level that moneylenders operate. So we have to try and find, and we're doing research to see, do we know the borrowers enough to know what's halfway to convenience and halfway to affordability? So at the moment, the moneylenders provide very, very convenient loans, but they're very, very expensive. And the credit unions provide fairly cheap loans, but they mightn't be as convenient. So it's to try and get the best of those two worlds and hope that that will help us expand the It Makes Sense loan. But I mean, I have nothing but praise for the number of credit unions. It's about 50%, 112 odd credit unions, 200 and something credit union offices who have taken up the It Makes Sense loan. And we hope to persuade them to keep doing it, but they have to make money and they have regulatory pressures of their own. So we will keep working at it.
Yeah, but there's one more question there for Bridget Harrigan.
Could credit union and on post basic bank account be something social welfare be paid into? So this is, it's in relation to cash payments. I think this is kind of a related question. So basically cash payments being an issue for people having access to financial credit, and could credit unions or on post basic bank accounts be something that social welfare is paid directly into?
Yeah.
I think the short answer is yes. They can be paid directly into that. It's about ensuring that people have access to those accounts, and the research seems to indicate that the people that should really have access to these accounts don't really have access to the accounts, in short, I think. Stuart, sorry, do you want to come back in there? Yeah,
I think it's an absolutely great question. And in the report, we actually make reference to a debate that took place during this financial inclusion strategy we had here. And there was a proposal or some talk of actually following a Danish model, which is where you mandate social welfare payments. They have to be paid into a bank account. And the group decided not to do that because they felt that people should have the choice of not doing that if they wanted to. You know, if you wanted to be paid in the post office and that suited you, that should remain the case. So there was actually a debate about that. And I think the answer is obviously yes, it probably could be, but, you know, do people want that to happen for them? And I think that was the debate. You know, do we actually make it the case that you have to receive your payment through one of these accounts, or do you have the choice of receiving it? And so I'd say maybe there's a job of work there to be done to say to people, look, have you thought of, you know, doing this, and maybe it might work for you, and to, you know, an informative and educational piece there, because I'd say people do have the choice. I don't know, maybe Michelle, you might know from talking to the Impost and Credit Union Pay Act people whether that is actually an option of having.
Yeah, I think it can. I think your monies can be paid in because they're current accounts. So I think social welfare payments can be paid in. The difficulty for lots of people that come to us is that sometimes they find it difficult to set up any kind of accounts. Now, I know with the An Post, there's digital onboarding, but proof of identity is often an issue in terms of whether people have a passport or a driver's license, and then there's proof of address as well. So sometimes people don't have, you know, if you're an unofficial tenant, maybe of a Halton site, or you don't have any kind of address, proof of address can be a difficulty. So it's not the actual I suppose, running of the account that might be a difficulty for someone. It's actually getting over the hurdle of opening the account in the first instance. Yeah, but yeah, social welfare can be paid into those, both those accounts are current accounts.
Okay. I think we've dealt with all the questions now, and I want to just thank everybody for participating. I particularly want to thank the support that we continue to enjoy from Angela Black, CEO of CIB, for taking time out to be with us today. I want to particularly thank Senator Eileen Flynn for joining us en route to Dublin, to the Shannon. And it's a great honour for us to have a Traveller Senator launching this research, and I really hope that that's the direction we're going to go in. Everybody on MABS, it's no secret that we have a lot of love and affection for Stuart and for his research, which gives us a really solid foundation to go forward with. I want to thank Michelle for driving this project internally and for doing all the hard work in relation to that, and for the MABS participants and the financial services that participated with it, that you're thanked in. I want to thank Nancy for hosting, doing a great job hosting today. I want to thank Denise for stepping in at the last minute, a bit of a last minute substitution. A great job done too. And finally, thank you to everybody who participated and for sending in your questions. And we implore you that if you're interested in working on this, whatever, if you're in any of those services or whatever, to remain in contact with National Traveller MABS, because we are intent on this being the first step towards moving and pushing for financial inclusion, a national financial inclusion strategy, which has travellers at the heart of it, because they need to be the ones that are listened to, and their concerns need to be heard in order to make a properly inclusive policy, and in order for us to build the box. So you can go off and watch the picture now of what the box looks like when it's built. It'll be on our website later on this afternoon.
And just to say the thanks very much to our board. Without their support, the staff of National Traveller MABS wouldn't be able to drive the disadvantage issue around financial exclusion and literacy into the arena. And I'd just like to thank them sincerely for myself and Dermot and the staff of National Traveller MABS. I'd like to wish you all, as I said earlier on, a very safe and a healthy Christmas. And I hope to Our Lady, as I said earlier on, that 2021 is better than 2020. And thank you very much again. Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.